Need custom beer labels fast? At InTouch Labels and Packaging, we deliver industry-leading 3-day turnaround on every order, regardless of quantity. We carry a wide assortment of die-cut templates in standard and custom shapes and sizes. With a combination of top-of-the-line machines and experienced operators, InTouch can pump out an astonishing quantity of custom labels quickly. Our competitive pricing means you get top quality labels without breaking the bank. Need help? Our top tier customer service is here to assist you every step of the way. So why wait? Get your custom labels with lightning fast 3-day turnaround and unbeatable service at InTouch Labels and Packaging, where your brand gets the attention it deserves.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to this morning, the first day 2 of the CBP virtual conference. This session is on tariffs, which if you haven't been paying attention or under a rock, is probably been a very topical thing. So we're going to dive into 3 things to do to reduce risk at your brewery and 1 thing not to do. And my name is Dan Klasen with the Beverage Federation. I want to thank, before we get started, CBP and Andrew and his team, as always, for putting this on. It's a great free education resource, as well as the sponsors, Chris at Small Batch Standard and his team, and as well as the InTouch Labels team. So very topical. Like I said, we're going to dive into it here and get started. Just some housekeeping things. There is always the comments section. So if you have something that you're thinking about trying to do for your brewery and it's related to tariffs, I bet there's a few other breweries out there who are thinking or trying the same thing. Toss it in. Hey, Dan, what have you seen with this? What are you looking at with that? And we can get into it. Always better to talk about something actually on your plate than something theoretical. So as I mentioned, Dan Klasen, I am the founder of the Beverage Federation. We are a craft beverage group purchasing organization, or GPO. So we spend a lot of our days talking with supply partners and our members, our brewery members, about procurement. So tariffs has been top of mind and something we're trying to help a lot of our members deal with. I'd argue if you want to talk Mario Kart and N64 with me at CBC or the next Guild event, please do. That is my definitive statement. I'll keep putting that on my definitive statement until I'm not having conversations with other people about how, Mario Kart 8 is better. Today is not going to be a discussion about tariffs from a political standpoint. There's other chat rooms, there's other organizations, there's other areas you can have that discussion. I'm also not going to have this be an academic discussion about the pros and cons of tariffs, about what this could look like in a year or two, how we got here. We're focused on action items. We're focused on what can you do this week, this month, this next 6 months for your brewery. That's going to be it. I'm going to be using examples from what we've been talking with others about mistakes that have been made by us, mistakes that have potentially been made by members in these early days. And it really gets at, I want to help you learn, grow, apply the information that we're talking about and collaborate. That's really the focus. So we're going to dive right into that this morning. It first starts off with, let's get at what you shouldn't be doing. This shouldn't be buried at the end. This shouldn't be an afterthought. This is the biggest takeaway. I get a lot of calls. People are saying, I'm hearing this. I want to do this. Right now, it's going to be the story of the unknowns. I've actually had to update this deck a few times in the last few months because things are coming in and moving so fast with what we're hearing in the industry. But it's a list of what's not known. We don't know a lot of detail. We don't know strategy. Things keep getting added or removed. So there's not a good sense of what's coming. No one really knows how the markets are going to react and for how long. And when I say markets, I mean both domestically, internationally, at a line item level. And is this going to be 3 months or 6 months or a year or longer? Again, and lastly, you don't know how it's going to impact always direct markets. So think aluminum, cans, ingredients, as well as supporting markets, which we'll get into a little bit. And it'll probably be the most academic 1 or 2 line items that I'll mention is how suddenly a tariff in one category could inadvertently impact another one. And all of this leads to the idea is you don't know. And this is my analogy is that it's a moving target right now. And anything from strategy tells us we shouldn't be trying to hit a moving target. So the biggest thing is do not make a lot of financial moves for your brewery without more data. So we have all the lists of unknowns. I know I get that feeling of you want to make moves, you want to make action, you want to buy this or add this or not do that. But it doesn't always equal savings, and it also doesn't always equal risk reduction. So a phrase that I've heard is, or saw in some of the different Facebook groups is, we just rented a space near the brewery and got a few extra truckloads of cans. We'll touch on this. That might be the right decision, but when I see or hear that, I have several questions. And depending on how you answer those questions, it could be that could cost you more money or not really reduce your risk in the long time. Or it could be the right call, but without knowing some of these things, that activity, taking just activity for the activity's sake is not the suggestion right now at all. That doesn't mean there's nothing you can do. There's not that you can't prepare for. In fact, that's what we're going to get into. And as we go along, a reminder of the chat room, feel free, dive right in there and say, Dan, what about this or that? So that's the big takeaway for what not to do. Don't make a lot of quick decisions based off of what you're seeing or hearing online and things like that. But that doesn't mean we can't prep for what's going on. What we're going to do is go through the 3 areas that you can do at your organization. I actually end this with a total of 6. These 3 are the 3 with the lowest risk and easier to scale down to a smaller to medium-sized brewery. The last 3 that I end on is if people are saying, what else you got? I'll list a few others, but those require more research and just want to give you a feeling of you've got several, depending on how deep you want to take this for your organization. So what we're doing is we're looking at, I'm going to start here off with, corporate large entities, right? So think, the boardrooms or project management rooms in Coca-Cola, Monster, Coors, et cetera, Anheuser-Busch, or even internationally at Modelo. When tariffs were mentioned last year in a political speech, these teams got together. They dusted off programs from their COVID programs. They started updating contracts. They went into tariff mode. Whether it was going to happen or not, they started to outline what their 2025, 2026 programs is. And all we're going to do is look at what happened in those rooms where you had 10 people in those organizations in the procurement and supply chain teams looking at that. And we're going to take those and apply them to what you can do at your brewery. And I find it helpful to take the 3 biggest impact ones. Supplier diversification and regional sourcing. I'm going to roll them out all 3 so you have them here. Increase operational efficiency, inventory, and logistic optimization. Those are 3 programs that are proven to help reduce risk or protect price for tariff, as well as some other things in COVID, as well as, scarcity and others. What I find helpful to do, though, is let's take out all the industry jargon and have a real conversation about those 3. So we're going to transfer this over to craft brewing community where you don't have a team of 12 people in your procurement, in your supply chain meetings, et cetera. It's you or your head brewmaster or someone that's helping you in taproom manager. So how do we take these programs and apply them to an organization doing 1,000 barrels annually, or with 3 or 4 employees, or where the owner is responsible for all of this? And that's another reason that I selected them, is they scale down well. And let's take a look at what they mean. And then going forward, we'll leave all the industry jargon at the door. Supplier diversification is just start shopping. Start looking at new supply partners. This doesn't mean switching yet. This means starting the process of looking and identifying and talking with both current supply partners as well as new supply partners. But from now on, we'll call that start shopping rather than that nice English, corporate America jargon here on the left. Increase operational efficiency is find other areas of savings. Check the couch cushions, as I sometimes say. These can be small things, medium-sized things, but it's taking the focus off of the line items that are taking up a lot of the energy in the room, and we'll talk about examples of that and look at other areas of cost. This helps your organization as a whole, because you're not only just working on the line items that everyone's talking about, like cans and malt, et cetera, but you're also working on other line items, and having a win there is going to help with the other elements of your organization. Inventory and logistics, buy in bulk. That's what we'll refer to it as. That's what you're talking about here. That is the idea of might sound straightforward, buying in bulk, but there's a lot of areas where you can make some mistakes. I've made mistakes in it. Others I've talked to have made mistakes. So we want to get at what are the 3 tips to doing these that would allow your brewery to enact these policies or programs without making a lot of costly mistakes, and then be sitting here next year saying, well, I wish I had done it this way or that way. And I'm going to dive into some examples at different breweries, and we're going to go over those 3 big tips. I move at a pretty big, fast pace rather. So again, questions about what did you mean by that? Let me know and we'll get into it. So start shopping. This is an area that has already begun. I know for many of you, in a way, as I hear some of the discussions and happening, but to start to look at how we recommend viewing this is start off talking with your current suppliers. If they're doing their what they're supposed to be doing, especially if they're a large to medium supplier, they should be sending you information on how they expect tariffs to impact. I've seen communication from Crown and Ball and Country Malt Group and distributing partners of those. So I put them in the big, large international category of they're communicating to down their supply chain what's coming and what they believe, what they're doing to address it. That's good. Not good that we're in this situation, but at least they're communicating. The other side of that is to, if you have supply partners you're not hearing from, to start reach out to them. And I hate to put one more thing on a brewery owner's desk, but it is that of saying maybe you want to reach out and send a ping to a few of your larger providers and saying, hey, what's your plan for tariffs? Not necessarily that email is going to solve a lot, but it's going to give you insight and information into, do they have a plan, and acknowledge that their supply chain comes from outside the U.S. And you might not always be aware of that. The other thing that I say to a lot of brewers is maybe that's what you mentioned to when you get that check-in call from the supply partner. You know how it goes. Hey, how's it going? I just seeing how you are on this Tuesday, just checking in. And usually the conversation is, do you need anything right now? No, don't need anything. I'm doing all right. It's brew day, it's can day, whatever. And I would make that an opportunity. It's like, hey, you know what you can do? I don't need anything right now, but can you send me your, a tariff update? I want to know if anything in your supply chain is going to be impacted. And just put that back on them. They should be able to put something together, send it over to you. And this is starting to help you understand an awareness of line items that you think will be impacted and line items that you won't. You might get a surprise email back. You might have a chemical provider or a tap handle provider or a hose provider who says, yes, we are anticipating it. 90% of our inventory comes direct from China. Like, I didn't realize that. So that gets on your radar in a way that a surprise invoice in August, that's not what anybody wants. So we want to do that. Biggest tip is all of that. You're trying to get awareness into what supply chains are going to be impacted and start putting together perhaps just a really basic Excel sheet of that. This doesn't have to be complicated. No one has time for complicated, but this is the start, how you build this plan for start shopping. You start getting the data, start getting people getting you information, and then you move into the second step. You have an understanding of your impact. You start identifying alternative partners. You can go as far as you want in this. I would not suggest going and pulling the trigger all within one day. A lot of times this is collecting some information, but you want to start to call that alternative partner. I ask a lot of brewers, when was the last time they looked at a quote for domestic malt? Historically, domestic malt had large contracts with the large beer producers, making it more costly, and that's driving the Canadian option. But there's a lot of small to medium malt providers that are out there. We work, for example, with Two Tracks Malting in Bismarck as an example, where they may not have been around a few years ago for you to reach out and ask that pricing, or to at least understand what the pricing looks like today. I see a lot of people referencing, pricing used to be like this in 2018. Well, a lot's changed since 2018. So this helps you with a couple of things. You could set up an account. You could get a current quote and then put that aside. Or if things look good, you could pull the trigger on that. But it gets the ball rolling so that down the road, if you need it, you're ready to switch when it makes sense for your organization, or ready to stay and you feel like you use data to understand why you're staying. So this is all building off of get the data on who's going to impact, get information that allows you to move if you need to move for your organization, and then move or stay. And the last thing that's a big miss when you're talking ingredients in cans is your contracts. If you're in an existing contract for a year or 2 years with anybody, a year on ingredients, typically multiple years, sometimes for cans as an example, other ingredients having a year contract as well, you need to reach out, or I strongly recommend you reach out to your current provider and ask what is the cost to cancel the contract. You can find that in the contract. Sometimes it's buried in a bunch of legalese, and full transparency, it could start that dialogue with your supply partner. Hey, I see that it's $1,000 to cancel our year contract. I'm using this as an example. Can you confirm? That's important. Your walk away amount, and you're really going to want to know that, so that when you're calculating switching, you've got a sense of the true cost. So we'll talk about that a few times, but understanding canceling those contracts, make sure you're aware, so it doesn't come to it's close. You feel like you have an understanding of switching, but only at the end to find out that it's a sizable contract cancellation policy they never really thought would come into play, especially for providers who have. I know a lot of breweries that signed contracts in December of 2024, and they're less than Q1 obviously into that contract. So that's shopping, and that's a big initiative of 3 tips, 3 things we're seeing. Really boils down. The tips are really derived from mistakes that have been made from other breweries that I talked to that didn't factor in those other things about they didn't talk to their supply partner. They were surprised that they came, 50% of it came from China, and they didn't understand their contract. So it made moving not nearly as valuable as they thought on paper. Next, we're going to talk about finding other areas of savings. This is something that larger organizations do all the time. And what they're trying to do is they're saying there's not a lot that I can do right now in that category of, let's say, malt or cans, but I have the ability to find savings in other areas that could help offset some of that increased cost that I'm anticipating. And it's a little bit of organizationally take a step back. Everybody's talking cans. Everybody's talking malt. Everybody's going to be talking, if something else gets products from China. You don't know next month if we'll be talking about 2 or 3 other line items. So in the meantime, it's an area of where else can we save? And it starts off a little bit differently than I think most people think we're going to start off in. I first recommend that people understand what a 10% increase might do for some of these line items. The reason that I recommend that, and I kind of throw that out, first of all, no one knows right now what the market impact will be for cans, let's say, or malt or cans. There's a lot of discussion whether cans and aluminums and from Canada, what that could be. And then once it hits your invoice, it's not a full 25%, but it's a portion of that. At the end of the day, rather than waiting to understand what that number looks like, it could be August before your number. Take a number like 10% and increase that for your cans and malts as an example. What you're trying to get at is, what is a number rather than a gut number, an actual number that represents what could be the increase to your costs of goods and your cost of ingredients and your operating costs on some of these line items this year, and kind of a worst case scenario. And 10% could be part, so that you're not sitting there going, well, I think it might be a $20,000 hit or 40,000 or 10,000. Use numbers, use math on those line items, because what you're trying to get to is the impact. And I'm going to use a $30,000 impact. If this has a $30,000 impact, that becomes the area that you're saying, I'm going to be working on addressing that with some of the things we're talking about. The first thing about, shopping, but I'm also going to be looking at how I can impact that in other areas of the business, so that if that really does happen and I'm not really able to influence it, can I chip away at it? I might not be able to get to neutral, but at least I can soften that and keep the organization healthier. And at a time where everyone's focused on how do you keep that $30,000 as low as possible in that example. And so this is where it gets into this. People usually jump right to step 2. And they're trying to save here and save on Post-its and save on pens and staples and trash bags and floor mats and all that, the soap, everyone's going to, single ply for the bathroom. That's great. But try to understand what you're working towards and then track some of that impact. So otherwise you're doing everything by gut, and you're probably going to miss the mark. You're going to feel too confident at the end of the year. Your number's going to come out, and it's not going to, although the work is not going to pay off if you don't have an understanding of what are we trying to overcome. So this is the areas that mentioning, to be talking to supply partners, looking at alternatives, areas that you could save. Chemicals is a potentially large area of savings. I've got hoses and packaging materials as an example. These vendors right now are not expecting a lot of discussion. They're not historically, if they're not coming out of a percentage of China or coming through Europe or Canada right now, et cetera, they're not getting nearly as many calls as the other providers that we talked about. So this could be everything from credit card fees, merch, your labels, energy and utilities. There are programs that help you reduce your energy and utilities. There's organizations we work with that do audits of your energy and credit card bills to find if there's been an overspend in areas and how you can reduce that on your water bill, as an example, or your waste removal bills. So all of that this time before, summer and patio season, and those of you who have a traditional, busy season is in spring, summer, winter months. This could be that time to look at these line items, find that cost savings, and say, it's 2,000 here, it's 3,000 here. and we're starting to drive down some savings at a time where we're then anticipating an increase in some of our main line items later on. And so the last is this gets at usually where the exercise stops. Usually I see that people say only do number 2. They search out, they do a little pricing, they find some competitors, and they that's good. There's nothing wrong with that number 2, but the exercise stops, and they're kind of wishing where could I do more? How could I do more? And step 3 is an area where you can go a little deeper. This is an approach of providing picking some of your supply partners and doing what I refer to as a spot check on pricing, and do 2 data points, last year and pre-COVID, if you have it. And why are you doing this? Your exercise above in step 2 might have been, well, we kind of got a sense. We went out and got 3 quotes and found that our current provider was higher. This exercise seems like more work, and it is. What you're looking for are industry line items that have slowly had to adjust their pricing because of inflation, or did not bring their pricing down after COVID, even though their industry has. And I'm going to pick on chemicals here a little bit, where some providers in some areas of the country, chemicals, like everything else, went up, and then inflation, and then some of that came back down internally for them, and that's not always passed along. And so by doing that check, you can start to identify as, look at what this looked like last year, as well as what this looked like in 2019. And that can start to be areas where you're going to do some investigation. But spot checking can then help you with the process that then becomes part of your perhaps quarterly review, where you look at a few supply partners and you do some spot checking. You can do that a couple of different ways. You could do it pre-COVID, last year, and then add in the data point of 2 competitive quotes. And then that becomes a validation. Yep, everything's good. They're competitive, still good customer service. They're still a valued partner, and we'll do a spot check on them next year, or it raises those flags. Appreciate Eric dropping in here. Eric tossed out that there are several products that can be used to increase yields that people do not consider in these situations. There's an upfront cost that is offset by the profit after packaging. Eric brings up a good point. And another part of this, I think it's a great point to mention, of the idea of that there are different ways of doing things that can save you money, rather than looking for the least expensive yeast provider. Be careful with kind of a race to the bottom, because sometimes when you find the lowest, then you start to sacrifice things like quality, lead time, customer service. But one of the things that Eric's mentioning here, it's a great point, is innovation, or doing something different and getting the same results. I'll tell you an example that I talk to people about, and there's different categories of that. There's production innovation, there's packaging innovation, there's front of the house innovation, and just doing it differently. One that I mention is we have a partner that does flexible growlers. So it's a growler that is plastic, that is 50 cents, and reusable and recyclable. And it's for those who want to offset their glass growler program. So what you're doing is you're still providing a to-go option, a to-beer option, but now you've solved for storage and cost. And actually you can make more on the flexible growler versus the glass growler. And it's a great example of still providing the same solution, just doing it differently. And in that example, actually making more money. And then solving for some other problems like inventory or breakage with glass. But yeah, great point, Eric, on areas of savings can come from both on the staying with what you're doing, just having someone provide it for less cost, or innovation, which is doing it differently and doing that way. All of it gets at the same thing of how do you operate more efficiently for those impacts. So just to close this out, finding other areas of savings is really that quarterly check. You want to look at costs that are trending, and a lot of people think this is something their accountant does, and typically isn't. An accountant's role is parallel to procurement activities. Some accountants will do this, but a lot of times they're worried about making sure that your books are accurate. The money coming in and coming out is accurate. Sometimes I'll talk to people and they're like, yeah, our accountant, I think, does this. And I'll say, I'd be surprised if they do a spot check of, what your hoses were. They can run a report and grab that invoice, but comparative analysis, and let's not use that in industry crap. Just price check from last year is not something they typically do, and it can be very helpful. And these are some of the categories to start off at. So the third that we're going to talk about here is buying in bulk. This probably seems like the most straightforward. I know a lot of you do it. We're going to touch on where some of the mistakes happen with buying in bulk and go there. It's the total cost is the first piece. So I'm going to buy extra of something. The two biggest things is that's great. That sounds good. Make sure you negotiate a lower price for the bulk order. You're in a position of you're getting more. That should be part of your negotiation, is if you're going to get a couple of more truckloads, another pallet, what have you, is saying, what can I get? That's another time to combine that with shopping, because one provider might provide you a better price with a bulk order where others might not. So that's first step. When I say get a complete cost of the breakout, this goes back to the phrase at the top of the discussion. If you're going to get warehouse it, if you're going to have the transportation from the warehouse, I mentioned this before. If you're going to break a contract, I'm thinking cans as an example right now. That's one I've heard a lot of people are like, we're gonna get some extra cans, more so than we've gotten in the past, and we'll just use that inventory and we'll ride this out. Not necessarily a bad idea, but I asked them a little bit about understanding the full cost of what an extra couple of truckloads of something means for their organization. This is the second area that's most often forgotten, is understanding the risk and impact to things like cash flow. So again, talking to your accountant, if we took an additional 20,000 and put it into inventory of cans, what does that do to our cash flow? The other risk of what does that do to hold that inventory longer? So the first tip is understand the true cost. And then the other one is to understand the full risk that comes along with buying in bulk. And then I would also say, is this solving all the problems that you've lined up and matching up to that? Does it really solve the problem? Does it really, does this new provider, if you switch providers just to get a bulk discount, what's their reputation, lead time, quality? Is this putting your organization at risk for this bulk order? An example that I heard is their warehouse that they had was not used to having a few extra pallets stacked in this location of the warehouse, and someone clipped it with the forklift. Now that can happen at any time, but having that happen when you've got three more pallets in an area that you're not used to is that example of risk. We're not used to having that there, and we didn't really address the idea of a crowded warehouse space. So it's a factor that's not usually thought of until after the fact. This is the last thing. Again, that's usually where the steps stop. This is the last one that I would say, and I tried to really put it as succinct as possible. You want to build these models, in my recommendation, my opinion, in a way that the value of the solution is good for you, even if the product doesn't increase significantly. Let me use an example so this is really clear. I recommend that you do not buy a truckload of cans or extra 10 pallets of malt or a bunch of chemicals from China in bulk. Before, it's hard to do that now with some of the tariffs that have come in place. And it only works out if they spike 15%. Why is that the case? Because no one really knows, as back to the first slide, what's going to happen. And if you built a model that has you hoping or wanting or only works out if things spike, it's going to leave you more often than not at the end of the year feeling like I did all that work and energy and it really didn't value out. Or it did spike and stayed, and you went through your inventory, and now you're like everybody else who has that. I don't think you want to be in a position where you're hoping that line item goes. Some of this is about peace of mind. Saying we made all these decisions, and even if it only goes up a little bit, it makes financial sense, but also it can help you sleep at night knowing I've got 5 extra pallets of something. Don't discount that as well. I'm not, some of peace of mind means a lot too, but trying to guess what the markets are going to do over the next 6 months and then making decisions that only prove out if they do those things, 9 times out of 10 is going to leave you more stressed and less sleep at night than miss it. So that's a tip that we see, and I talk to people and they say this is really going to help when they add 25% from Canada and 25% on aluminum and 50% and now I'll have that. And the discussion that I usually say is, well, it's not probably going to carry all the way over to what that is, and you paid a premium for that. So you only kind of reduce your risk and pricing if this really goes high. So that's the point that we really try to take it to the next step when you're doing that. If you ever have questions on that and want to email me, again, I know I went through it quickly at the top, and I'll end here with my email is dan@beveragefederation.com. Feel free, shoot it my way. Happy to take a look at it, get on the phone, we can talk about it and say, how can you make this work? That's something we really want to do as well. So again, these are a lot of the 3 big things that you can do at a small brewery, 50 size to barrels annually, up to before you have that procurement team, right? So I don't know a lot of breweries that we work with that's got someone sitting in the back office doing this full time. So this was meant at 3 things you can do, start doing this week at your brewery that are meant to be low risk, but help you, either save money, save time, or reduce that risk. And the tips are all about what, quite frankly, mistakes we've made, mistakes others have made. And so we want you to have that. You can email me. We'll get this deck. Andrew's great about putting this out there. I want to end on, obviously, if you've got questions, let me know. This is meant to be the deep dive. I also get from people, okay, Dan, those 3 I can do. What else you got? I'm going to mention these. These are things you can research. You can email me. These are more complicated. These are things that others do. Coke and Pepsi and Monster and Coors and Answers. Everyone's doing these things. And so you can tackle them. But the reason I didn't want to get into them is they're not a one size fit all. And there's more risk involved in that. And so wanted to make sure people had that list, and we'll roll this out here. Adjust pricing, cost pass-through. So this gets a little out of my procurement swim lane, but I do mention it. I watch this information, but it's something you're going to want to definitely do your own research onto. But it's the idea of once the dust settles, and if you have a 10% increase to something and then feel that you need to adjust your sell price, that is an example of where procurement and supply chain talk with marketing and sales, and there's a price adjustment. You can do that. It's another way. I will mention this though. Tariffs are different than inflation. And so there's been some things going on that I've been watching, and I'll mention here a little bit, but many of you I've talked to did something like this in the last 2 years with inflation, where they had to increase your 4-pack on your to-go, whatever, your prices in your tap rooms adjusted. And it was inflation. The way that people interact with inflation is universal and both conscious and subconscious. So this is the only academic thing I'll say is if I look at my Saturday, I take the kids to go get some donuts. I know, the prices are a little higher. We fill up the gas tank. We go grocery store. We head over to the brewery. By the point I walk into the brewery, I've interacted with 5 or 6 things that have all gone up. And I either consciously or subconsciously realize that's inflation. Things are a little bit higher than they were a few years ago. And so when I go to buy my 4-pack and head out the door, I don't think of the fact that it's higher. Maybe there's a little sign that says, due to inflation, we've had to, we appreciate your business. Sometimes I see that. But the point is that inflation is felt across a lot of things you interact with and over a period of time. Tariffs are harder to message. Messaging inflation isn't easy. Tariffs are even harder because consumers don't understand an individual line item. So even though our industry are very focused on all what's going on with malt and cans and things like that and distilling and counter tariffs, your average consumer might not be. So when they come in and they see a higher price, they might not react the same way they did last year for inflation. That's why you need to do research, and this has a riskier element of it. Tariffs are political. Inflation was political, but that's another element of this is where people are not just factoring in one data point, but then could bring their politics into that. So it's taking something that was already hard to do and making it even harder, basically. And the only example that I would reference is there's some organizations that have been messaging about adding an egg cost. Different than tariffs, but same principle. There's a scarcity issue, and that has caused their primary product to go up in cost. And so they're trying to tell their consumers. And if you read about that in the news, you could learn some lessons from it because it didn't exactly go 100% great or 100% horrible. It had kind of mixed results. But it's the same principle about telling your consumer that because of X, Y, Z, it's costing us more to put out a product that you love. So this is one thing we're doing. So this is something that takes more of a lift. Exploring alternative packaging and recipes. These are big changes. Switching from cans to bottles or changing recipes to address impacts of tariffs that you don't know how long they're going to last. I mention it as something that others are doing. And by that, I mean other large organizations are doing because they have a lot more capital and people to work on that. And it doesn't scale down easily. So it's on the list as something you can look into. It's something that helps combat tariff risk, but it takes a lot more of a lift than a slide and a PowerPoint. And yes, I still use PowerPoint. And so the last one is a little bit of a connection to that. It's contract brewing. This has been coming on more and more. I talk to brewers who have capacity. This could be an opportunity for collaboration. It would take a conversation with some brewers, perhaps in your area, about is there something we can do together to share this risk? If you're able to produce something, one example is if someone has a bottling line and has a capacity and you want to do a test run on a seasonal beer with them because it'll help eliminate that can risk. These are kind of specific. It would have to be a unique situation where you know of another brewer who you could have a conversation with and get out a pen and paper and figure out if this makes sense. But at the end of the day, you're either sharing risk or they're taking the risk by doing that. And you're instead of going out and getting 3 truckloads of can, for example, you're investing that in a relationship with contract brewing with someone in the area and then they're owning the risk of that. Like I said, something to do. It's an option, but a lot of moving pieces and much more than that. But this is something that large organizations do during tariffs to offset the risk. Is shifted to someone else who wants to kind of model out the unknown for the year. So a lot there. We went over. I want to end with my contact information, everyone. and just touch on it. My contact information here, Dan at beveragefederation.com. And not only was it great to get a chance to go over this, I do want to end on one last thing. I speak about this a lot. Sometimes it seems like I'm a little bit, positive or lighthearted about it. It's not the case. Usually I'm talking about Excel and numbers, and that's a little dry and not sexy to begin with. So I try to keep it a little bit more upbeat. But this is hard. At the end of the day, everyone's going to be going through another challenging line item in the industry that we're all in. And there was already some headwinds. So we're all in this together, where there's not a brewery I know who's not impacted this. So I really do say, if you want to ever talk about it, if you ever want to shoot an idea by me, please feel free to reach out, send an email. Happy to have a discussion, because it's going to be a challenge to get through it, and happy to share what's working and what's not with you. But appreciate the time today. Always appreciate the Craft Beer Professionals Group and Andrew for getting this information there out at no cost, and making it education focused for the industry that we both like and enjoy, and really love consuming your products. And that's all I have today. Thank you to the sponsors, and thank you to Andrew.